The afternoon sun slanted through the dusty window pane, illuminating the small, somewhat cluttered living room. It was a modest apartment, the kind where the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbor sneeze, but it was filled with a certain kind of warmth that money couldn't buy. In the corner stood an upright piano. It wasn't a grand instrument by any stretch of the imagination, some of the keys were slightly yellowed with age, and if you pressed the pedal too hard, it let out a faint, squeaky protest. But to the woman who lived there, it was the most important object in the world. Her name was Clara, though most people just called her the piano teacher. She wasn't famous, and she certainly wasn't rich. In fact, her bank account often hovered near the scary side of empty. She scraped by on a few odd jobs and the generosity of neighbors, but her true passion was sitting on that bench. She believed that music was a language that didn't require words, a bridge that could connect even the most isolated souls. That Tuesday afternoon, there was a hesitant knock at her front door. It wasn't a loud bang, just 3 light taps, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they were welcome. Clara put down her tuning fork and went to open it. When she pulled the door open, she saw a young boy standing there. He looked to be about 7 or 8 years old, small for his age, wearing a neat but slightly stiff button-down shirt. He was holding onto the hand of a woman who looked exhausted, her eyes lined with worry. "Hello," Clara said, smiling warmly. "Are you the teacher?" the woman asked. Her voice sounded tired, like she had been arguing with someone all day. "I am," Clara replied. She looked down at the boy. He had dark hair that fell over his forehead, but what caught her attention immediately was his gaze. His eyes were open, but they didn't focus on her face. They drifted slightly to the left, staring at nothing but the empty air. He was blind. "This is my nephew, Leo," the woman said, giving the boy's hand a gentle squeeze. Well, his father isn't really interested in this sort of thing. He thinks it's a waste of time. But I heard you might be willing to help." Clara looked at the boy. Leo stood perfectly still, his other hand clutching a folded white cane. He looked scared, as if he expected to be told to go away. "Music is never a waste of time," Clara said softly, opening the door wider. "Please, come in." They walked into the living room. The aunt sat on the sofa, twisting her fingers together, while Clara led Leo over to the piano bench. She didn't grab his hand, she simply guided him by hovering her hand near his elbow, letting him sense her presence. "This is the piano," Clara said. "It's a big beast, isn't it? Do you mind if I sit down?" Leo shook his head. Clara sat down and played a simple C major chord. The sound resonated through the room, clear and bright. Leo flinched slightly, turning his head toward the sound. "It's just vibration," Clara explained. "Sound is just air moving. You can feel it as much as you can hear it." She reached out and took Leo's small hand. His fingers were cold and clenched tight, like a closed fist. She didn't force them open. Instead, she just rested his hand on the smooth wooden lid of the piano. "Feel that?" she asked. Leo nodded slowly. "It hums," he whispered. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was quiet, shy. "Exactly. It hums," Clara said. "Now, I want you to know something before we start. I don't have any rules here. I don't care if you hit the wrong notes. I don't care if you make noise. The only thing that matters is how you feel when you play. Does that sound okay?" The aunt let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a long time. "His father," she started, lowering her voice, "he is a very busy man. A CEO of some big company. He doesn't have patience well, for things that aren't perfect. He thinks Leo needs to be tough. Clara looked over at the aunt and gave her a knowing look. Toughness is overrated, Clara said. Understanding is better. She turned her attention back to the boy. Leo, I'm not going to charge your aunt or your dad for these lessons. We're just going to play. Is that a deal? Leo turned his face toward her. Even though he couldn't see her, he seemed to be looking right at her. For free, he asked. Absolutely free, Clara said. Music is a gift. You don't put a price tag on a gift. A small smile tugged at the corner of Leo's mouth. It was faint, but it was there. Outside the apartment building, the street was busy with the noise of the city. A black luxury car was parked at the curb, engine idling silently. Inside the tinted rear window sat a man in a sharp gray suit. He looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine, stern and composed. This was Leo's father. He had driven them here, planning to wait in the car, maybe checking his emails or making a few calls. He had expected to wait for 10 minutes, tell his sister-in-law that this was a foolish idea, and take his son back to a world of tutors who focused on math and science. Things that mattered. Things that built empires. But he hadn't made any calls. Instead, he had rolled down the window just an inch. Through the open window of Clara's ground-floor apartment, he could hear everything. He heard the piano chord. He heard the woman's voice, soft, patient, and strangely calm. He heard his son's whisper. The father sat frozen, his phone resting on his knee. He was a man used to control. In his office, he decided who spoke and when. He decided the value of everything. But listening to the conversation inside that small apartment, he felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was a tightness he hadn't felt in years. He heard Clara tell his son that toughness was overrated. The man gripped the steering wheel tighter. He had spent his life trying to make his son tough, trying to prepare him for a harsh world. He thought he was protecting Leo by shielding him from things that might make him weak. But listening to Clara, he realized he might have been wrong. He watched the front door. He couldn't see inside, but he could imagine the scene. He could imagine his son's hand on the piano. He knew Leo's hands were always fisted, always ready to block out the world. But this stranger had managed to make him open them. The father checked his watch. The lesson was supposed to be 30 minutes. It had been 5. He told his driver to wait. Inside, Clara guided Leo's fingers to the keys. She didn't correct his posture. She didn't tell him about scales or theory. She just let him press down. Plunk. A single note. E-flat. It wasn't part of any song. Good, Clara said. What did that feel like? Hard, Leo said. Yes, the keys are heavy, Clara agreed. But you made that sound. You did that. Another note. Plunk. Then another. Slowly, the boy began to explore. He wasn't playing a song, but he was exploring a landscape he had never visited before. He was mapping the world with his ears and his fingertips. The father outside closed his eyes. The muffled sounds of the piano drifted out to him. It was clumsy noise, random and disjointed. But to him, it sounded like the most important thing in the world. He realized that for the first time in Leo's life, his son wasn't being told what he couldn't do. He was being shown what he could do. Clara smiled at the boy. She didn't know that the most powerful man in the city was sitting just a few feet away, listening to every word. She didn't know that her simple act of kindness was dismantling years of rigid expectation. She just saw a boy who needed to know that his voice mattered, even if that voice was made of music. "You have a good ear, Leo," Clara said gently. "I can't see the notes," Leo said, a touch of sadness in his voice. "You don't need to see them," Clara replied, placing her hand over his on the keys. "You just need to feel them. And I promise, I will be right here to help you feel your way through. As long as you want to play." The boy nodded, and for the first time, his shoulders dropped. He relaxed. The fear in his posture melted away, replaced by a curiosity that sparked like electricity. Outside, the man in the car opened his eyes. He didn't start the engine. He didn't pick up his phone. He just sat there, listening to the random notes of a piano, feeling the heavy wooden door of his own heart beginning to creak open. He stayed there for the entire lesson, a silent witness to a kindness that money could never buy. The weeks drifted by, turning the warm afternoons of early autumn into the crisp, cool days that followed. The routine became the most stable thing in the boy's life. Every Tuesday and Thursday, the same black luxury car would pull up to the curb. The aunt would walk the boy to the front door of the small apartment, give a quick wave, and leave. She never knew that the car never actually drove away. She never knew that the boy's father, a man known in the city for his icy stare and ruthless business deals, would simply instruct his driver to wait. He would sit in the back seat, the engine idling softly, hidden behind the dark tint of the windows. He had a stack of reports on his lap and a phone full of urgent emails, but for those 45 minutes, the work remained untouched. He just listened. Inside the apartment, the world was quiet except for the sound of music. The teacher had decided early on that standard methods wouldn't work. She couldn't put a book of sheet music in front of a child who couldn't see the notes. She couldn't point to a page and say, "Play this." So, she invented a new way. She used simple materials that anyone could find. She bought a pack of textured stickers from a local craft store, some felt, some rough sandpaper, some smooth velvet. She spent one evening carefully sticking them onto the white keys of the old piano. The rough stickers meant play this note, and the smooth ones meant skip. It was a crude system, but it was a language the boy could read with his fingertips. "Okay," she said one Tuesday afternoon, sitting close to him on the bench. "Let's find middle C again. Run your hand along the bumps." The boy reached out. His hand moved gingerly over the keys, his fingers searching for the texture. When he found the rough patch, he pressed down. A clear, perfect note rang out. "Good," she whispered. "Now, feel the vibration. That note is the anchor. Everything else builds from there." But it wasn't always that smooth. The boy was dealing with a frustration that had been building up inside him for years. He lived in a world that was designed for people who could see. Every day was a battle to navigate spaces that weren't built for him, to understand things that were explained visually but never tactilely. He felt like he was always one step behind, always guessing. A week later, that frustration boiled over. They were trying a simple melody. It was just a few notes, a children's song that most kids learn in minutes. But the boy kept missing the transition. His fingers would slip, or he would lose his place on the keyboard, hitting two keys at once. The sound came out jangled and wrong. He stopped abruptly. He pulled his hands back into his lap and clenched them into tight fists. "I can't," he said. His voice was low, shaking with anger. "It's too hard. It's just noise." The teacher didn't rush him. She didn't say, "Come on, try again." She didn't say, "It's easy." She knew it wasn't easy. She just sat there, waiting for him to breathe. "I hate it," the boy snapped, his face turning red. "I can't see where my hands are supposed to go. I feel stupid. Everyone else can just look and know what to do. I'm in the dark." He slammed his fist down on the piano keys. A dissonant, loud clang echoed through the small room. It was an ugly sound, the sound of giving up. Outside, the father in the car flinched. He heard the shout. He heard the bang on the piano. His instinct was to get out of the car, to rush up there and fix it. That was what he did in business. When there was a problem, he stormed in and forced a solution. He wanted to tell his son to stop acting out, to be strong, to focus. But his hand hovered over the door handle, and he stopped. He realized he didn't know how to fix this. Money couldn't buy a cure for frustration. Power couldn't order a child to understand music. So, he stayed in his seat, his heart hammering against his ribs, and kept listening. Inside the room, the teacher shifted on the bench. She turned her body fully toward the boy. She didn't look annoyed by the noise. In fact, she looked incredibly calm. "It's okay to be angry, Leo," she said softly, using his name for the first time in a while to ground him. "It's okay to hate it. It's hard." She reached out and gently touched his shoulder. He was tense, like a coiled spring. "But you aren't stupid," she continued, her voice steady and low. "You are learning a completely different language than everyone else. You're learning it with your hands and your ears. That takes a different kind of courage." "I don't feel brave," the boy mumbled, tears welling in his sightless eyes. "I just feel lost." "Close your eyes," she said. "They're already closed," he snapped, though there was less bite in his voice now. "I know," she said with a hint of a smile. "I mean, close them tighter. Shut out the world. Forget about the keys. Forget about the song." She took his hands. They were still clenched into fists. She didn't pry them open. She just held them. "Now," she whispered. "Can you hear my breathing?" The boy went quiet. The room was still. He could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant traffic outside, and the slow, rhythmic sound of the woman inhaling and exhaling. "Yes," he said. "Match it," she said. "Breathe with me." For a minute, they did nothing else. Just sat there, breathing in sync. The anger in the room seemed to dissipate like steam, floating away through the window cracks. The boy's shoulders dropped inch by inch. "The music isn't out there on the paper," she said, finally guiding his hands open. She placed his palm flat against his own chest. "The music starts in here. The piano is just a machine that echoes what you feel inside. If you feel frantic, the music sounds frantic. If you feel scared, the music sounds scared. But if you can find the calm, the music will be beautiful." She moved his hand back to the keys, but she didn't let him play yet. She placed her hand over his, pressing his finger down on a single low note. They held it together, letting the sound vibrate through the wood and into their bones. "Just one note," she said. "Listen to it die away. Listen to the silence after it." The father outside had his eyes closed now. He wasn't looking at his watch. He wasn't thinking about the board meeting he had in an hour. He was visualizing the scene inside. He was imagining his son, usually so quiet and withdrawn, letting out all that pain. He was picturing this woman, this stranger who asked for nothing, teaching his child how to breathe. It hit him then, with the force of a physical blow, that he had never done that. He had never sat with his son and just breathed. He had always tried to fix, to teach, to prepare. He had never just been. Inside, the boy took a deep breath. "Can we try that part again?" he asked. His voice was small, but the anger was gone. "Of course," the teacher said. "But remember, don't play the notes. Play the feeling." The boy lifted his hands. He found the textured stickers again. This time, he didn't bang. He pressed down with intention. The notes came out slowly, a little halting, but clear. It wasn't a perfect performance, but it was an honest one. The teacher smiled, though he couldn't see it. She began to play a harmony along with him, a soft, supporting bed of sound that lifted his simple melody up. For the first time, the boy didn't look like he was fighting the piano. He looked like he was having a conversation with it. The lesson continued like that, weaving through the mistakes and the frustrations, turning them into moments of connection. When it was over, the boy stood up. He seemed taller somehow, lighter. "Thank you," he said. "It wasn't just for the lesson." "Anytime," she replied. He walked to the door, his cane tapping confidently against the floor. He stepped out into the hallway. The father watched him come out of the building. He watched his son walk toward the car with a stride that was different, less defensive. As the boy opened the car door and slid into the back seat, the father looked at his son's face. The boy was smiling, just a little bit. "You were loud in there today," the father said, his voice gruff, trying to hide the emotion in it. "I messed up," the boy said, looking down at his hands. "But she helped me fix it. She didn't get mad." The father nodded. He looked back at the window of the apartment. The teacher was standing in the window, watching to make sure they got off safely. She couldn't see them through the glare, but he knew she was there. "She's a good teacher," the father said quietly. "She's the best," the boy agreed. The father signaled the driver to pull away. As the car merged into the traffic, he didn't pick up his phone. He just sat back, thinking about the sound of that single, held note, and the silence that followed it. He realized he had a lot to learn from that woman. He decided he would keep watching, not because he didn't trust her, but because she was teaching him how to be a father, one note at a time. The autumn days grew shorter, and a crisp chill began to settle over the city in the evenings. The local community center was buzzing with unusual activity. It was the time of year for the neighborhood showcase, a casual event where people from the surrounding blocks came together to share hobbies. Usually, it was a mix of pottery displays, knitting circles, and maybe a slightly off-key choir performance. But this year, the teacher had signed her student up to play. She hadn't asked for permission. She knew if she told the boy's family, they would have found a reason to say no. His father would have said it was a distraction. The aunt would have worried about him getting nervous. So, she simply told the boy, "We are going to play for some friends. It will be fun." The boy was terrified. For the entire week leading up to it, his hands shook whenever they sat at the piano. The textured stickers on the keys, which had become his map, suddenly felt confusing under his trembling fingers. "What if I forget where the notes are?" he asked during their last lesson. His voice was tight with panic. "What if I hit the wrong key and everyone laughs?" The teacher stopped playing the harmony she was working on. She turned on the bench to face him. "If you hit a wrong key, we just play the next one. There is no such thing as a mistake in music, only a surprise." "But they will see me," he whispered, dropping his head. They will know I'm different. They will watch me fumble. Music isn't about being watched, she said softly. She took his hands and pressed them flat against his own chest again, a ritual they had practiced many times now. It is about being heard. When you play, close your eyes. Pretend you are back here, just the two of us. The audience isn't there. It is just you and the sound. On the evening of the showcase, the small hall in the community center was packed. Rows of folding chairs had been set up, filled with neighbors holding cups of cider and plates of cookies. Children were running around, and the air smelled of cinnamon and floor wax. In the very back row, standing in the shadow of a heavy curtain, stood a man in a dark coat. He had cleared his entire schedule for the evening. He had told his assistant to cancel his calls, to hold all meetings. For a man who measured time in millions of dollars per hour, this was unheard of. But he stood there, hidden from view, his heart beating harder than it did during any business negotiation. He watched the ant bring the boy to the front of the room. The boy held his cane tightly in one hand and the ant's elbow with the other. He looked small and fragile on the wooden stage. The father felt a strong urge to walk up there, grab his son's hand, and take him back to the safety of the quiet, controlled car. He hated seeing his son put on display like this. It felt like setting him up for failure. But then, the teacher walked onto the stage. She was wearing a simple cardigan and a smile that looked completely genuine. She didn't look nervous at all. She guided the boy to the bench, helped him find the right distance, and leaned in to whisper something in his ear. The boy nodded, took a deep breath, and let the cane fall to the floor beside him. The room went quiet. The chatter stopped. The rustling of papers ceased. The boy placed his hands on the keys. The father in the back stopped breathing. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then, the boy began to play. It wasn't a complex piece. It was a simple melody, something the teacher had composed just for him, using the limited range of notes he had mastered. But the way he played it was different. He didn't bang the keys. He pressed into them with a firm, steady pressure, letting each note sing out clearly. He played with a slow, deliberate rhythm, feeling the vibration of the music before moving to the next chord. Halfway through, his finger slipped. He hit a sour note, a jarring sound that echoed in the quiet hall. The father flinched. He saw a few people in the front row shift uncomfortably. He saw his son's shoulders tense up, ready to bolt. But the teacher didn't stop. She was sitting on the bench next to him, and she instantly played a soft, resolving chord that wrapped around the mistake. She turned her head, smiled at him, and kept the rhythm going. The boy hesitated for just a heartbeat, and then he kept playing. He flowed right back into the melody as if the wrong note had never happened. The father watched in awe. He saw the panic on his son's face melt away, replaced by a look of deep concentration. He saw the boy's confidence grow with every measure. It wasn't just music, it was bravery in its purest form. As the boy played the final chord and let his hands linger on the keys to feel the sound fade away, the room erupted. It wasn't polite applause, it was a genuine, loud cheer. People stood up. The ant was crying in the front row. The boy sat there, a look of shock on his face. He turned his head blindly toward the noise, a slow, bright smile spreading across his lips. It was a look of pure triumph. In the back of the room, the man in the dark coat didn't clap. He couldn't. His throat was tight, and his eyes were stinging. He saw his son standing up to bow, awkwardly but proudly. He realized then that he had never seen his son look like that, powerful, capable, and happy. He turned and walked out the side exit before the crowd could thin out. He needed a moment to compose himself. He stepped out into the cool night air and leaned against the brick wall of the community center. He pulled out his phone to call his driver, but then he stopped. He thought about the teacher. He thought about the way she had sat there, not to perform, but to protect. She had turned a mistake into a moment of grace. She had given his son a victory that no amount of money could ever buy. He realized that all this time, he had been trying to prepare his son for a harsh world by making him tough. But this woman had prepared him by making him brave. And as he looked up at the stars peeking through the city lights, the powerful CEO knew he was deeply in her debt. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was a father who had just seen his son fly, and he knew he couldn't just stand on the ground forever. He had to change. He had to be the man his son thought he was. The excitement from the recital took a few days to settle, but eventually, life in the small apartment returned to its quiet rhythm. The winter air was getting colder, and the teacher had started putting a heavier blanket over the piano bench to keep it warm for her student. The boy was still riding high on the success of his performance, practicing with a new vigor that filled the room with energy. But the teacher knew that the bubble of joy was fragile. She knew that the boy's father, the powerful man who owned half the city, wasn't just a shadow in a car anymore. He had been at the recital. She had felt his presence, even if she hadn't seen his face. She knew that a confrontation was coming. She just didn't know what form it would take. It happened on a Friday afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dip below the skyline. The boy had just left with his aunt. The teacher was wiping down the keys with a soft cloth, humming the tune they had just practiced. There was a firm knock at the front door. It wasn't the hesitant tap of a neighbor or the cheerful rap of the mail carrier. It was authoritative. It was the knock of someone used to being obeyed immediately. She opened the door and found herself standing face to face with the man she had only seen from a distance. He looked taller up close, and much more imposing. He wore a coat that looked like it cost more than her entire year's rent, and his expression was unreadable. He didn't smile. He stood there like a statue carved from ice. "Mr. Thorne," she said, though she hadn't actually been formally introduced. She just knew. She stepped back slightly but held her ground. "May I come in?" he asked. His voice was deep and smooth, but there was a sharp edge to it. "Of course," she said, pushing the door open wider. He walked into her living room. He didn't sit down. He stood in the center of the small space, looking around with eyes that seemed to analyze everything. He looked at the stacks of sheet music, the worn carpet, and the old piano with its yellowed keys. It was a stark contrast to the world he lived in, a world of glass, steel, and perfect silence. "You played well at the recital," he said, turning his gaze back to her. "Or rather, you managed him well." The teacher folded her arms. "He played well. I just sat next to him." The father let out a short breath, almost a scoff. "Let's not pretend. I saw what happened. He hit a wrong note, a jarring, terrible note. And you covered it up. You saved him from embarrassment." "It wasn't a terrible note," she said calmly. "It was just a surprise. And I didn't cover it up. I just helped him find his way back to the music." The father took a step closer. The air in the room felt heavy. "You didn't charge him," he said. "It wasn't a question." He pulled a thick envelope from his pocket and placed it on the small table near the door. It landed with a heavy thud. "This is for the past 6 months. And this, he placed another envelope next to it, is for the next year. I can hire you full-time. I can build a studio in my house. I can buy you a grand piano, a Steinway. You can teach him there. The teacher looked at the envelopes, then up at him. She didn't reach for them. You can't buy this, Mr. Thorne. Everyone can be bought, he said, his voice hardening. I don't like owing people. You have done something for my son, and I intend to pay for it. That is how the world works. Value for value. Is that how you raise him? She asked softly. The question hung in the air, dangerous and bold. The father narrowed his eyes. Excuse me. You treat him like a transaction, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You think if you throw enough money at his blindness, it will go away. You think if you hire the best doctors, the best tutors, the best equipment, he will be fixed. But he isn't broken. And you can't pay someone to give him confidence. I don't teach him because I want a paycheck. I teach him because he has a voice that needs to be heard. If I took your money, it would become a job. And he doesn't need another employee. He needs someone who cares. The father stared at her. He was a man who shouted in boardrooms and fired people with a single email. He was used to arguments about logic, profit margins, and strategy. But this woman was talking about feelings, about things he couldn't quantify or control. It made him uncomfortable. It made him feel exposed. I can give him things you can't, he said, though his voice lacked its previous certainty. I can give him security. I can make sure he never wants for anything. He wants for your time, she said. He wants to know that you think he's capable, not just a problem to be managed. When you pay me, you're trying to outsource his happiness. You can't do that. She walked over to the piano and rested her hand on the keys. Do you know why he plays so well now? Because in this room, he isn't the blind son of the CEO. He's just a boy making music. He feels safe here. If you move him to a big, cold studio in your house, if you turn this into a business deal, you take that safety away. You make him feel like a project again. The father was silent for a long time. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed incredibly loud. He looked at the envelopes on the table, then at the woman standing by the piano. She wasn't intimidated by his money or his title. She saw right through the suit, right through the power, and saw a worried father. He slowly reached out and picked up the envelopes. He put them back in his pocket. I don't understand you, he said quietly. You don't have to, she replied. You just have to let him keep coming here. For free. No strings attached. And if I refuse, he asked, though it sounded more like a test than a threat. Then you take away the one place where he feels like he's winning, she said simply. The father looked at the floor. He thought about his son's face at the recital, the pure joy of that moment. He realized that the joy hadn't come from the expensive suit the boy was wearing, or the fancy hall. It came from the connection he had with this teacher. It came from the freedom she gave him. He nodded once, a stiff, sharp movement. He will continue to come, he said. But I will be watching. He is always welcome, she said. He turned to leave. He had his hand on the door handle when he stopped. He didn't turn around. I was there, he said. At the back. When he played the wrong note. I wanted to stop it. I wanted to take him off the stage. But you didn't, she said. No, he said. Because you didn't panic. He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. As he walked away, the teacher let out a long breath she didn't know she had been holding. She looked at the empty spot on the table where the money had been. She knew she had made an enemy, or perhaps something much more complicated. She had challenged the most powerful man in the city and told him he was wrong. But as she sat back down at the piano, she knew she had done the right thing. Some things, like love and music, really were priceless. And for the first time, she thought that maybe, just maybe, the father was starting to understand that too. A few weeks after the confrontation in the small apartment, a large, thick envelope arrived in the teacher's mail. It wasn't a bill, and it wasn't a threatening letter from a lawyer. Inside, she found a set of keys and a deed to a property. It was a beautiful, historic house just a few blocks away, with a separate building in the backyard, a spacious, sunlit studio specifically designed for music. The acoustics were perfect. The piano was a top-of-the-line instrument, sleek and black. There was a short note written on heavy stationery. It didn't say thank you. It simply read, "A place where light can find him. No rent, ever. The tenant only needs to keep playing." The teacher sat at her old kitchen table, holding the keys. She knew this was the father's way of apologizing without having to say the words. It was his way of giving her the tools to do her job, while finally respecting that she wouldn't take money for it. She accepted the gift, not for herself, but for the boy. They moved the lessons to the new studio that spring. The room smelled of fresh wood and polish. Windows lined two walls, letting in the afternoon sun that warmed the floorboards. The boy loved the new space immediately. He could hear the difference in the piano, a richer, deeper sound that vibrated through the floor and up into his legs. But the biggest change wasn't the room. It was who started showing up. At first, it was just glimpses. The father would drop the boy off, but instead of speeding away in his car, he would linger in the doorway. He would stand there, silent and still, listening to the scales. He never interrupted. He never spoke. He just listened. The teacher would nod at him, and he would give a stiff, barely noticeable nod back. Then, one afternoon, he walked all the way into the room. He took off his coat and laid it over a chair. He sat on a small bench in the corner, far away from the piano, but close enough to see his son's hands. "Today we are working on rhythm," the teacher told the boy. "I want you to count out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4. The boy began to play. The father watched. He saw how the boy's fingers searched for the keys, how he leaned his ear toward the sound to check the pitch. He saw the concentration on the boy's face, a look of intense focus that he had never seen at home. The father realized that in his own house, filled with expensive gadgets and helpers, his son was passive. But here, in this sunlit room, his son was an artist. He was the one in control. After the lesson, the boy stood up, stretching his arms over his head. "That was hard," he said, breathless. "You did good," the father said. His voice was deep and startled the boy slightly. The boy turned his face toward the corner. "Dad, you stayed?" "I did," the father said. He stood up and walked over to the piano. He looked at the keys, then at the teacher. Can I see what he is reading the notes?" The teacher smiled. She opened a drawer and pulled out a sheet of heavy paper. It was the boy's music. But instead of black dots on lines, it was a series of raised bumps and lines, Braille music. The father had never seen it before. He stared at the paper, running his own fingers over the bumpy surface. It looked like a secret code, a language he didn't speak. "I can't read this," the father whispered. He sounded almost ashamed. I can't understand what he sees. You don't have to read it with your eyes, the teacher said softly. She moved beside him. Try closing your eyes. Feel the pattern. The father hesitated. He was a man who relied on sight, on facts, on things he could see and verify. Closing his eyes felt like giving up control. But he looked at his son, who was waiting patiently. So, the father closed his eyes. The teacher guided his hand to the paper. Feel this line that moves the melody up. Feel this dot that changes the note. The father stood there, in his expensive suit, with his eyes closed, letting a woman he barely knew guide his hand over a piece of paper. For the first time, he wasn't the CEO, he was just a student, trying to understand his child's world. I feel it, the father said quietly. It's complex. It is, the boy said, a smile in his voice. But once you know it, it makes sense. It's like a map. The father opened his eyes. He looked at his son. I never knew, he said. I never knew it was this hard. Or this beautiful. It's not hard if you listen, the boy said. The father reached out and placed his hand on his son's shoulder. He gave it a gentle squeeze. It was a small gesture, but for this family, it was massive. The walls that the father had built, walls of money, walls of expectation, walls of fear, were crumbling. I have time next Tuesday, the father said, looking at the teacher. If it is all right, I would like to sit here again. Maybe I can learn too. Not to play, but to understand. The teacher beamed. We would like that very much. As they walked out to the car later that afternoon, the father didn't get into the back seat. He walked his son to the car door, holding his arm. You played well today, he said. Thanks, Dad, the boy replied. No, the father stopped him. I don't mean you played the right notes. I mean you played like you weren't afraid. That made me proud. The boy smiled, a genuine, bright smile that reached his sightless eyes. The teacher stood in the doorway of the new studio and watched them drive away. She wasn't just a piano teacher anymore. She was the bridge. She had taught the boy to find his voice, and in doing so, she had taught a father how to listen. She turned back to the empty room. The sunlight was fading, casting a golden glow over the piano. She walked over to the bench and sat down. She didn't play a song. She just rested her hands on the keys, feeling the cool ivory. She thought about the cold man who had stood there weeks ago, ready to buy his way out of guilt. She thought about the father who had just closed his eyes to learn a new way to see. She struck a chord, letting the sound ring out into the silence. It was a perfect, clear sound. The music didn't just belong to the boy anymore. It belonged to all of them. And as the echo faded, the teacher knew that this was the best song she had ever helped write, the song of a family finally learning to play in harmony.